afternoon. We have an exciting session, or at least it's exciting for me. I'm about to nerd out, and it's so interesting and fun. Before we begin and before I ask questions, I'd like us to do something only poets can do, which is read poetry. So my name is Nondwe Mpuma, and I am sitting with Maneo Mohale, Uhuru Phalafala, and Sarah Lubala. And I'm very excited to hear them read, and I have a request. And there was a request that I read. I wasn't really keen, but I shall read because I have been asked to do so. And it fits in very well because I want us to start with God. I know the title is Fracture. We'll get to the fracturing. But we'll begin with godly things. And with that said, I will begin reading. Maneo, I'd like you to read.
Oh, God.
And the poem that I would like you to read is the first poem in the collection. Right? That's the one. Uhuru, I'd like you to read. And the poem that I've chosen is Movement 6, I think. Movement 6.
Okay.
But it's very long. But still, I want you to read it.
It is an
Le Falantate. That's the poem.
Until the end of one.
Yeah, until the end of one.
Okay.
And Sarah. 6 errant thoughts on being a refugee. That's the one. Okay, so I will begin with Eden because things begin with the beginning, right? And I like things that are pleasurable. I like pleasure and God, maybe. I'm not sure about that one. But pleasure, for sure. Eden. We begin with plain and pleasure, let it be known. There are no hills and mountains. We won't find bones here, not Adams, not Eves. Beloved, we are too close to waters. Our totems fear the seas. Between us, lust sits in burgundy. We are easily movable in the work of the Lord.
Firstly, I want to say how obsessed I am with that poem and the audacity of beginning. We begin with plain and pleasure. Like, yuck, gross. Sis. This poem is called Letsatsi, which means the sun, but also means the day, but also means sunrise, in that beautiful way that Sesotho has of spreading out across meanings. In your mother's red gulf, you ask her what Benoni means. Son of my sorrow, hearing the sun instead, you turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Ghosts are living in mine dumps as your mother drives you home. Honeycomb mountains are brittle. Tomorrow, you ask her for a crunchy after school. Like all names of the Bible, Benoni sounds ancient. Out your mother's mouth, magic, menjik, magic. You are still small enough to hide inside the good book's rice paper pages. You do not know yet what you are. Have not had Leviticus angled at you like an ice pick. For now, the Bible is a hand drum for women draped in white and blue. Kokatlehong, in a pockmarked garage, there are women made of cloud and ocean. They make terrifying sea-wide music. Skupu, the plastic bottom of everything that has a heart. Shells and bottle tops on ankles. How neatly old and new gods sit together. In school, you meet a man named Cecil John and learn the word pioneer. Turn the word over in your mind like a coin. Your mother is a witness. your mother is a pioneer, not yet knocking on doors to tell people about the good news. You wonder if Cecil was a witness too. Wonder on whose doors he knocked, for which God, to spread what good news.
Yum. Hey, greetings everyone. Hi. Thank you for being present here on our delicious panel. Thank you for selecting a section for me to read from my epic Mine, Mine, Mine. It's in 6 movements, and I'm gonna be reading from movement 6, Lubala. Lubala ntate ke matlhoko le maswabi le boitsholo ba go fenywa ba go tlhabisa ditlhong ba go tlhoka mantswe ba go omisa leleme ba mo tsietse botho a sa phela ba mo tsiela polelo a sa na le molomo ba mo tsiela lentswe a sa na le leleme motho ke sera seo fela se rego ge se rakaletswe se sena leleme se latlhe botho se hlabane ka marumo. Our inheritance is deep disgrace, shame, silence and defeat that dries our mouths and leaves deserts in our souls. My grandfather's humanity was taken while he was alive, his language broken in his mouth, his tongue severed and buried. A human being is a beast that when cornered and its tongue taken, throws away his humanity and fights ferociously with weapons.
That's a tough act to follow, God. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Okay. This poem's called 6 Errant Thoughts on Being a Refugee. 1. On the worst of my days, this body is a gym crack vessel. No more than 2 lungs and a tremor nailed to salvaged wood. 2. Grief traveled with me across the Ubangi River. I prayed love and all her cognates on the passage over. Libet, to please. Lips, to be needed. Leap, to beg. I arrived with bruised knees, wet hair, a mouthful of salted fish. 3. I am so hungry, hungry, hungry for holiness, for communion, for a God you can sink your teeth into. 4. I was raised on the Congolese gospel. I can teach you how to forget where you are from, how to worship the wide road before you, hands open, like this. Make each palm a letter to the sky. 5. Beni is a town with 1 police station, airport, market, many graves. I should go back. My people are weeping. 6. Home is a narrow bed.
Let's all take a deep breath. Whew. I'm not big on self-care, but whew. Okay. to the questions. So the reason that I chose these poems will become clear. Okay. It will become clear in my questioning. So the title of the session is Fracture. And when I was sitting and I was thinking about what we're going to talk about, it was, okay, what does fracture mean? I like etymologies of words. I always begin with etymologies. And I thought fracture is a medical term. And, you know, life happens so beautifully that we end with Sarah, who begins about talking about the body. And, you know, the fracture is the breakage of a bone. I'm not a medical professional, so this might be all wrong. It's the breakage of a bone. And then you have what is it called? See, I even had to write note. You have a compound fracture, which is when the bone breaks and it pierces skin. So I thought that was a good way of thinking metaphorically about what we do outside of the medical profession, how fracture as a term can be used in a manner that isn't so medical. And in thinking about fracture as not medical, there are many things then that can be fractured. We can talk about the themes in our collections, excluding mine, but we can talk about the themes in the collections, which we'll get to, but that's not my primary concern for now. My primary concern is maybe because I have a complicated relationship with God, and what ties all these collections together is this obsession with talking about, praying to God. And all of these poems that have been read in some way talk about, refer to. And I want us to explore then the fracture that happens with one's faith. Like, what do we make of that fracture? Is it even a fracture? Can we describe it as a fracture? And if it is a fracture, what do we do with that fracture? What do we do with that fracture through poetry? What do we do with that fracture in life? And I think, Maneo, then we'll move over to you.
All right. Oh, I think a word that I'm listening to or listening for as you're talking about fracture and the body. And also I'm thinking about a really fantastic trans poet that I am being led by and sort of like spiritually initiated by an incredible writer called C.A. Conrad. And they like to say that you need to bring the body with you when you think. And I think listening to you, perhaps I wasn't thinking in the writing, especially of that poem. I wasn't thinking about a fractured relationship with God. I was thinking about rupture, rather. And its relationship like to rapture, like how close that is, maybe. What am I?
Yeah, you're jumping.
Okay, sorry. Sharp.
Rapture.
Great minds, I'm just saying.
Think alike.
I'm seeing.
Rapture, right?
I see you.
But we'll get to rapture.
Fine.
For now.
Let's stay with fracture.
Let's stay with fracture.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We are in the brokenness for now.
I also enjoy discipline, so thank you so much for doming me, Chum. So, I think, thank you. I think if now that I'm being asked to think about fracturing, and in that poem, the fracture that I'm moving through is the fracture of my relationship with my mother. My relationship with God, I think, rests inside of her as a body, like as a way. All of the women in my family are Jehovah's Witnesses. I was raised inside of that faith, but also raised in the weird hinterland between my mother and my father. My father is a non-practicing Catholic, and I think in the worlds that I'm exploring in Letsatsi are not even of those worlds, like pioneer that language and witnessing, which comes up a lot for me. Your mother is a witness, your mother is a pioneer. That comes, I'm being literal. My mother's a Jehovah's Witness, and the position that she holds in the church or the faith is that she is a pioneer. But I also, the word pioneer, I'm thinking about settler colonial logics. I'm thinking about whiteness, which is why I'm talking about Cecil John, and also why I'm trying to be disrespectful a little by not calling him by his surname, because we know him as Rhodes, Mandela Scholarship Rhodes, University Rhodes, you know. So I think I want to bring him down a peg in my powers to do so. Also because in the poem, Cecil John is not capitalized. I'm trying to humiliate him a little because I can. I have that power. When I woke up to that power, I was like, yes. I'm writing in English, sure, but I can do things with the English language that play with power. And I think when I'm talking about empire, or when I'm talking about God in the poem, what I'm really talking about is empire, which is an obsession for me.
So God is empire.
In this world, yes.
All right. Uhuru, fracture.
Faith and fracture. So this collection is about my maternal grandfather's journey as a migrant worker. He was a gold miner in Johannesburg. We live in Limpopo, so he would be gone most of the year and return for 3 weeks during Christmas and then go again. My mother's side of the family are what we would call believers. They are a side of the family that embraced missionary education and Christianity. My mother is third generation Christian, whereas on my father's side, they did the opposite. They rejected and marooned in the mountains. And my grandfather was what we called lekgolwa. He was away most of the year. And when he died, he died of silicosis, and he had been vomiting blood. My mother was caring for him. She was a medical doctor. And some of his meager belongings that we found, amongst them was a short pocket book titled Hard Times for Christians. And it broke my heart that amongst his meager possessions was this booklet that was supposed to bring him comfort. Hard Times for Christians. Read that when you're missing home, when you're removed from home, when you removed from family life, from society, and so forth. And that pissed me off, quite frankly, right? That, in fact, the Christian doctrine was used to conscript people to the mines. It was like, the hard work ethic of Protestants. It's godly to work, come into the mines, and, it left such wreckage and catastrophe. So I often wonder about how his relationship was to Christianity. He was a staunch Christian. My mother was a staunch Christian. But then when I sat down to write this, it wasn't out of my own volition. He visited me in my dreams. I had been wondering about all of these things. What does it mean to serve this God who puts you in the womb of the earth and away from your family, away from your kids, and so forth? And I had been sitting with these questions. And there was visitation from my grandfather, who now had transitioned and was very clearly creating rupture between dimensions. He was now very much alive. I read with that quite masculine voice because I'll never forget the strength with which he was rendering this. So it was very, very sonic. It was very auditory. And I was like, hey, wait, what are you doing here? You're an ancestor and you're talking, you're Christian, what's happening? And that's how the book came about. And it also kind of opened up a world of gods, ancestors, Badimu, that was just so prolific and broad and deep.
Just to kind of complicate that, if it opens up a world of gods, how does that destabilize your relationship between God the Father, the Son, the Christian God?
I never really had a relationship with God the Father. That was not something. I was more like, I was raised on my father's side of the family. They were just like, we don't do that here. We just don't. I mean, it's a wonder that my father and mother ended up together because they really hold opposing beliefs. My father's side of the family are just like, what? The father and the son? Where's the mother? And we have so many questions. We just have so many questions. And I was like, yeah, me too. I'm going to roll with you guys. So, yeah, let's do the questions. Let's sit with the questions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Uhuru. Sarah?
Yeah, for sure.
So, like all of you, I grew up in a very Christian family. My family, starting as far back as my great-grandma, who I was fortunate enough to meet, is deeply, deeply Catholic. My uncle's a priest. My mother grew up in a village right next to a church. She was supposed to become a nun. That's what my grandparents wanted for her, but she said, if you want all the nuns to start wearing makeup and going out at night, that's what's going to happen. So in some ways, it's a strange inheritance because it's the language I grew up with, and it's why it appears so often in the book. It was the first kind of poetic language I ever learned. But I knew from a very early age that my mother and my father and my parents' God was not necessarily a God I was interested in knowing. So I think it's Anne Sexton who has this line that shatters me every time that says, I think she says something like, I had to pry out the broken pieces of God in me, which was very much my experience, right? The God I was presented with was insufficient. I had to break that God apart, and I created a different one, one that's interested in pleasure, one that's interested in taboo, one that's complicated, one that's invested in mystery and engaging with it. So when I write/pray, 'cause sometimes they're the same thing, that's the God I mean, and that God, it's vastly different from the one I was handed.
Okay, interesting thoughts. God as empire, God as non-existent, God as fractured, God as pieces. And I think in all of these collections, as I was reading them, because I returned to them and I read them again, I was like, okay, sure, I get that these collections aren't about God, but there is this kind of God that we all seem to be attracted to. There is a kind of God that we seem to be trying to redeem in various ways. Whether we redeem them or not, that's a whole different discussion for another day. And maybe to diverge a little. Okay, maybe I should get you to read some poetry because I'm very aware of time. I'm very aware that this is a festival and we stick to time. So sticking to time, I'd like you guys to choose a poem that you feel represents the kind of fracture that your collection centers around. So the kind of theme that you feel like best represents your collection. So I have my own selections, but the pressure is on you.
You're
Choose wisely.
The pressure's getting worse. So can I? Worse. Can I hear what your suggestion is? I have an idea which one I want to read, but I'm curious now and nosy. Like what?
I feel like it's unfair.
Fine.
It's unfair for you to ask me to choose for you.
Fine.
Because then I don't know what you were going to choose, and then you might just say that what I've chosen is what you would have chosen,
Okay,
and then
fine.
that's unfair.
Let me tell you what I want to. I want to read Delta.
I was thinking Dahlia. Well, it was in the D.
I see. Okay, fine. Okay, I really like Dahlia too. What one?
See.
Okay, actually, I really like it because there's a physical fissure. I'm gonna do it. Thank you. Sorry, Nondwe. Thanks, babe.
Not okay.
Love you. Okay, I'll read Dahlia. I really love Dahlia. So I all of the flowers in all of the poems in my collection, there's 31 little babies in here. They have floral botanic titles, and some of them are quite scientific by their sort of
I can't pronounce some of them.
by the Latin nomenclature, but others are just like sweet little blossoms that I put in. And this one is a sweet little blossom. It's called Dahlia because it was Kafka's favorite flower. And I'm a sucker for Kafka, for real. He's my baby girl. So the poem starts with an epigraph, and then this is about the last conversation I had with my abuser. The quotation. Like the cogency of the air after a thunderstorm, my qualities appear before me and overwhelm me, though I may not put up much of a fight against them. The poem starts. Under this light, the pavement breathes, nothing but fissures in cement and the shrubbed conversation of weeds beneath me. I'm pleased by my body's ample, these hips, a brown pendulum. The very last time we speak, we meet at Kafka Cafe, the broad scent of coffee. Kafka is peopled with Vancouver's bespectacled offcuts dressed in black. I'm unskilled in departure. After injury, I'd rather leave the door ajar than evict. Let yourself out. Your parting shot. They'll leave you too once they see. It'll happen again, you know. I know.
Uhuru, the floor, the proverbial floor is yours.
Very difficult choice to make in an epic, but movement 2 is on women who are in the rural areas, such as my grandmother and my mother, while the boys and men are in the city. And movement 4 is on women in the city who are forging illegally urban identities. Aus Matsidiso, called Mary by her madam, who loves dogs and tolerates Africans. Her home, an embattled zone of domestic surveillance, dutiful discipline, a daily routine, social warfare on black female body, hateful mind bosses give white wives rights to prowl auction blocks and hire house slaves whom they rename Matsidiso now girl, T-girl, maid girl. Faithful white women embrace white power and white wealth, wear sleeves of gold and cloak white terror, kleptocracy, cocky pride, enjoy spoils of their men's exploits. Their husbands only see black women during enactments of male power, defile us in front of their wives, in the refuge of their castles, cut our face with bones of their scorned ribcage, suckle their spawn, Adam, on the bleak bounty of our body, wetness against the aesthetic of their breast, to be packed and firmer in richness and in health for husband's tenderness after he's drained his violence in us. A lapse in judgment of momentary fall from grace, tempted by the devil with an insatiable appetite. White women call us whores. Black men call us whores. See us as sites of conquest that mock their shame, smack us in the face for getting hit by racing horse carts of their master's virile machine, weaponized. We, receipts of deceit in the seventh quarter, where Adam you suckled comes of age in threadbare linens, a rites of bars passage, historical master copy of the father's original sin, braiding the raiding of my grandmother's body with the fibroid of my daughter.
You know when you hold your breath through a reading and then you only breathe once that reading has completed?
I'm going to pass out at these readings.
Sarah, the floor is yours.
Okay. In this poem, fracturing happens on many levels. There's a fracturing of a family, of a culture, of a language, and of a people. It's called You Are Here, and it goes like this. In the days after you left, the emptiness became our government. We owned a single mattress. We belonged to the floor, to the blunt charity of sleep. In The Guardian, there is an article on Chuluba. The journalist writes, "The failure of the language to be taught at school has resulted in the replacement of native words by French words. I want to say something about losing your way, about speaking to your mother and stumbling over your own name. It's not the will to die, only to kill the thing. That girl in her school dress, eye of water, fist of violets, the wick split with blue light. I must wait her out. I go to lay down, and there is a knife in the bed. I like the word ghosting as active verb, how it turns loss to remembrance and remembrance to inheritance, how the smoke of a life goes up forever and ever. In Cape Town, a friend points to a car guard, tells me they're all Congolese. I am a country wrung out. I am every person consumed out of their place.
Breathe. Okay. As I said before, I'm interested in this medical term of fracture. So the fracture as the breakage. And I think the breakage is always obvious. It's always the first meaning that we get. And then we have the compound fracture, the fracture you get after listening or after reading or after hearing. So the subliminal meaning of a poem that's either contained obviously or not. And I want us to transition, just because of time. I would have liked to have you respond, and I think in your responses to my next transitioning, to gentler things. So we've come from breakage, and a synonym for fracture is rapture. But is it a synonym? Is it a synonym? Because when we think about rapture, rapture is about passion. It's about, when you read the poem that I asked you to read, it's about that. It's about that kind of passionate, it's about ecstasy. So when we think about fracture and rapture as synonyms, and I want us to move away from thinking about them as synonyms and to think more about rapture as passion and as ecstasy. So how do we then make, like, now that we've published these things, so we've published these poems, and they do certain things to the reader, and we wanted them to do certain things, or when we read them, they did certain things. Now we are able to look at them and judge them from a critical distance. So I'm asking you to judge your collection from a critical distance and talk about rapture as opposed to fracturing, as opposed to the titles of the poems. So just for the audience, there'll be a signing downstairs after this reading. And marketing is important. This is Sarah Lubala, A History of Disappearance. So there's an inherent fracturing, disappearance. There's an inherent fracturing. So we already feel somewhat, to use an overused and like a useless term now, violated. We've been violated by the title, right? So we're not going to talk about the violating title, and we're going to talk about rapture. My collection, it's cute. I love the cover.
Hugely
It's
cute.
called Peach Country. That's inherently not violent. I'm already saying I'm not
sure?
violent. We have mine. We need to have a conversation about the title. When I saw the title, I was thinking mine, as in, I own you, mine. I thought secondary, like about the mine, like digging in the mine. And it's very much about mining as opposed to mine. And there's a lot more that I want to say about this collection because it's a new collection. So Uhuru, this is new. This is like brand new. You need to get it because most people haven't even read it. So it's an experience. So now that we know that it's about digging, violence, we already think South Africa, diamonds, gold, violence. But now I'm asking you not to talk about the violence, but to talk about rapture, the passion, the ecstasy. Everything is a deathly flower. 2018.
2019.
2019, my bad. It's yellow, yellow happy, but deathly flower, not so happy. But I want us to go passion. So, Maneo, Uhuru, Sarah, think about rapture. How do we then redeem? How do we leave people not feeling violated?
Okay. I'm chomping at the bit to talk about this because, I was disciplined in the beginning while talking about rapture. Now I'm like, it's my chance. I think I'm very suspicious of redemption and redemptive narratives, mostly because I live, as we all do, under white supremacy. And if you've noticed, white supremacist narratives, especially ones where the protagonist is like a very cute white boy, and there are many, but I think, one thing that makes me deeply suspicious of redemptive arcs is trying to search for humanity without really sitting inside of the moment of harm. Abolitionists like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who I absolutely adore, who wrote an incredible book called Abolition Geographies, ask us to think and start with harm, that we can't move towards justice, forgiveness, amnesty, which is a huge, weighty word in this country, without thinking about harm and beginning with harm. So, in thinking about passion and rupture and rapture, I think even in the decision for the cover of my book, I wanted to entice, I wanted to seduce. And there's something hot about hot colors, like red and orange and yellow. And I think even as a formal device, as a poet, and by framing all of this in the botanic, in the natural, in flowers, I'm asking you to come closer. But once you come closer, and it doesn't even take that much distance, if you just approach just the subject matter, just from the very first poem that you asked me to read, that I'm asking you to really sit in something dangerous, inside of something fleshy, inside of something so real, not far from you, inside of us, deeply inside of us. And I think maybe in thinking about rupture, rapture, and passion, and making a case for my book, I suppose I feel like I'm making an elevator pitch, but on you. The passion that leaks, like Gobeba Badarun likes to say, that meaning is a leaky substance, meaning leaks. And as poets, what we do isn't about containment, isn't about succinct sort of packaging of feeling. It's about letting the pores of the poem, widening them so that meaning can leak. And I think the thing that is very obvious in my collection is that I'm very passionate about language. That language isn't just a tool for me, it's also a subject in itself. So,
and we need another session to talk about language, which this is not.
So yeah, that's my case.
Thank you, Maneo. Uhuru?
So, I'm still like, when I think rapture, I don't think ecstasy, but maybe there's rapture and rapture with an A, and I think you're talking about rapture, or both at the same time.
Both at the same
and I'll
time.
talk about both at the same time. This is a document of grief. This is a catalogue of grief. Written in the wake of my grandfather's death, but there's something very specific about Black grief. There's something very specific about Black grief. You grieve your grandfather's passing, and then all of a sudden you're in the Atlantic Ocean. All of a sudden you're in 1400, you are in the mines, you are on the plantation. It's so multi-layered that the exploration of grief in itself opens up so many worlds, not limited to the catastrophe of it all, also leading to a sense of ecstasy. The exploration itself keeps, it's like pa, pa, pa,
It's
pa.
ecstatic.
Yeah, and it's the pa sends a kind of, in the writing, it's a jolt in the body, and that in itself is a sense of accompaniment that feels so rich and positive. It's not like, oh,
Sometimes it is.
yeah, the grief is there, but there's something on the other side of it that is perhaps the ecstasy that you're talking about. And I have to just say here that the epic ends in what you would think of as ecstatic. And I too like etymology. So the etymology of ecstatic is to stand outside of yourself. Ecstasy is to stand outside of yourself. And I have certainly had that feeling when I was moving through these movements, and I call them movements because it felt like I was moving through this thing. How do we metabolize this particular history? Where is it sitting in my body? And then all of a sudden I was out of my body. It was like ecstatic, and can I do a little reading at the end?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Uhuru.
But did we die? Yes, we did die. Found salvation from whoredom and lascivious eyes of the master, salivating over harems on plantations and servants' quarters. Black bodies on strike, self-immolate for transcendence, out of the ruins and smolder of remarkable destruction, in the thick silence of starry darkness, the blackness of creation, a vision and a voice. Do not be afraid, you have found favor and redemption. Unto you daughters shall be born, with medicine for the lineage in the bones of their tongues. Yes, we did die in the blackness of destruction and creation. We part our hips like the sea and birth ourselves. Use our mothers' names to sing our resurrection. Weave our purpose with gifts from 3 wise women who imprinted scriptures forged out of stardust and spectacular smithereens of our former selves into kilts of our hearts. Moonlight illuminates our new name, the dying wish of burning mouths, blazing in our bones, blossoming with revelations of our spirit supreme.
Ooh. Thank you, Uhuru. Sarah, because time.
For better or worse, because, the Catholic inheritance, rapture makes me think of the rapture.
That too.
Which,
that counts.
Disappearance.
Yeah,
This is what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
But I could go
also
there.
resurrection.
Come on. But what I want to talk about in this instance is for me, I think you've all touched on this, and it's absolutely true about this language that lives in our bodies, right? And writing as movement through the body. And as a trauma survivor, I spent years in talk therapy, right? And I think it was like 8 years of me being like, well, when is this gonna finally help me? When am I gonna finally be healed? When do I self-actualize? And I was constantly, so much of therapy was about you talk it out, right? You talk the emotions, the overflow out, and then this is the containment, and then you go out there and, you're fine. And I quickly became really annoyed with that kind of thinking, right? And it also emerged from a history of being from a family, both for Christian reasons, but also because of reasons related to what it means to be an immigrant in the world, was very much about you get on with it. You don't wallow, we don't, there's no crying, there's no dramatic, please get on with it. And I needed a space where I could overflow. And it's interesting because this collection on one hand is that overflow, finally being able to let those words and the emotions flow and do what they needed to do and not have to give them direction, but also the writing is very spare in some parts. So I like to play with the container I was given as well, and how those two work together. And for me, maybe one of the things I love most about what poetry did for me is that it let me be untidy for the first time, and that's what rapture is for me. It let me be messy, you know?
Can I
be messy, yes.
Can I say a thing mostly just about
Short thing.
very so short? I think what I love the most about your poetry, and having the deep privilege of having sat with your poetry for a long time, and something that I savor, and I'm very excited to sit with your poetry, Uhuru, now that it's new, and I want to sit because it's so rich. You play with sparseness, and I think that space that you make is so gorgeous. I think your poetry is full of such air. So I wanted to say
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you, Maneo. Thank you for keeping it short. Now we're going to open it up to the audience because I'm very aware of time. I'm trying to be very good. I'm typically not good.
Hi. So it's not even a question. It's just the mine is also mine, Jesus is mine. It's a whole gospel song. So that was also getting...
And just to add on, when you finally get your hands on the collection, there are many very overtly Christian things that happen, which would lead you to think it's very much about Christianity. The procession, like coda. There's a lot of things that maybe weren't intentional, but to the lay reader are. Okay, go on.
Yes, I was thinking about the intertext like that with the whole gospel song. But also, I know we talk about God and we're really going for Him and kind of fun, enjoy it, it's there. Okay, I'm on that boat right now with my writing. But also, I'm also on the boat of thinking, these people that we're speaking about, because we're all speaking about our elders, people that came before us, they understood it also as joy. We are breaking it down and saying, oh, this God that did that, and I have a whole piece on it. But when I also write, and I spoke to my grandmother, actually, I went to, and I was like, these are my poems on God, what do you think? And she was like, yeah, but God is also good to me. And she was like, you are coming with all your poetry. And then I listened to her sing, and immediately I was like, oh my God, she's happy in a way with God as well. And I think we need to also recognize that God. Yes, Christianity is what it is. God is what it is. We can write about Him however. But some way, someone has a joy with that God also.
Can I just say, I find deep joy in God. She's amazing.
I think that was the whole idea between the difference between fracture and rapture. So there is that breaking, but there is that redemption. What we make of the redemption, what that looks like, then becomes individual.
I feel so honored, first of all, by just the panel. Just gorgeous beauty everywhere. And what's sitting with me now is that most often is we see black women as a site of trauma. And obviously because of the coloniality of it all. And the persistent and ever-pervasive patriarchy. And it's so rare to ask black women about their spaces of joy and their time of joy that I just want to give this moment and honor this moment to ask you about which women you found on the other side, or the women that you're looking for through the poetry. Have you found those women? Are they happier women if they desire happiness, you know? And even in those moments, specifically for you, Uhuru, who is doing a sort of redemptive touch on ancestry now, that your grandfather has passed and transcended to the realm of the ancestors, and that visitation, and also thinking of where feminism is at this point as this staunch adversity to manhood and maleness, if I could call it that, and how difficult that space might have been if it was even for you. Did that make sense?
Just rephrase it
Okay.
as a question, like.
Okay, so my question is, firstly, the joy, womanhood.
Yes.
You've got that one. You got.
Yes.
Okay, so when you think of manhood and masculinities and where feminism is as a sort of adverse reaction to what masculinity and masculinities present, did you encounter any difficulties with that kind of straddling, whether or not you are a feminist, but that your own life experiences with your grandfathers and that, I don't know what to call it, that interplay or that interface of those two lives coexisting, because I think there was a coexistence that happened there. Is it a bit clearer now?
Yeah. Do you want to speak on the joys? Okay. So, joy with the women in my lineage is in words. This is an epic because it's an utterance. It is voiced. It is voices I grew up listening to. I get poetry from my mother's mouth and from my grandmother's mouth. They enjoyed the pleasure of words. They went about this way to just get here. They went proverbs weaved in, song, body movement. That was their joy. The domestic setting, whether they were confined to it or not, was a space of joy. It was a space of resistance. It was a space of pleasure. That's where I learned poetry. I didn't grow up with access to books. I read my first novel at 17, but I had access to this archive, living, embodied archive of words, and I associated them with pleasure always. And even today when I speak, I make it capacious. I'm like, I approach speech like, hey babe, let's come here, come here, come closer, you know. So there's pleasure in language, and this is a great gift, and this is an honoring of that. Because part of this document is very much involved with naming things. Let's name this historical neurosis as it lives in the country, in the national consciousness, and in the body. Let's name it, give it a name, to speak to it, speak of it. So I think that these women, through the pleasure of language, allowed me to have the courage to write about mining. I never thought I'd write about mining. Never crossed my mind. And to your second point, I think that the grief piece is part of, overused word, healing. Part of, why do I want to quote Edward Said? He talks about coming into critical consciousness is taking inventory of the traces left in the body. Yes. And this is that project, taking an inventory of traces left in the body. So there's this violence and this violence, but it is all geared towards becoming whole. And becoming whole is embracing both my father's side of the family and my mother's, both my mother and my father, my grandfather and my grandmother, to me, critical unconsciousness, if there's ever such a thing, is leaning to just the one party and saying, I am on your side, babes, but we are family. I have to listen to these stories and be able to hold them together because they do live in my body. And if I hold only one and uplift it and leave one, I am wounded. It's literally like I'm a bit lopsided within my own body. I'm what? Fractured. Yeah, that's. I hope I answered.
If we could just do like a sentence about joy each.
A sentence?
Yeah, a sentence. Like
you met
limitations are good. They're great.
Have you met me? I will try and sum it up. I don't know if I can do a sentence, but I'll do it as quickly as possible. So touching on words, for me, it's about what words can do for me in my body. One of the things about poetry, I think you mentioned this yesterday, Maneo. It's not, I wouldn't necessarily say it's cathartic at all times. Sometimes it's just rough. But one of the things that always is for me is that it reminds me of my breathing. I think sometimes when we talk about the trauma of black women, we forget that it resides in the nervous system. White supremacy lives here. Here. And so for me, the joy comes from being aware of myself and other bodies and the tenderness of the idea of civilization as bodies breathing in proximity to one another, that intimacy. So for me, the joy comes in the space and the breath that I make. And it's one that you have to make often when you're black and female. But that's not necessarily always, it doesn't need to be a story of oppression. It can be a story of agency and power. And there's joy in that for me.
Maneo?
Oh.
Yeah.
I think I've been thinking about womanhood in a deeply distant way as someone who isn't a woman, who moves through the world as a non-binary person, but also school, like English is weird in the sense like it's such a utilitarian language, whereas the language that I come from isn't about tools or communicating or like taxonomy. It's not really about categorization. It's really about poetry, deeply, deeply poetic. So it's so poetic. So when I think about my own pronouns in it's ba and o, when someone talks about me, they're not just talking about me, they're talking about my lineage. And even in the way that we greet, like dumelang, not dumela. You're greeting everyone that comes with you, everyone that is present with you. So when thinking about joy, I would say that joy is the way that I experience it is both blood-soaked and also birthright at the same time.
All right. So I'll give a sentence, I think, or maybe two. I'm very serious about the project of Black Joy. Like, I take it seriously. It's a project that I think is worth claiming and it's worth writing about. And I think my collection, to a degree, was about writing Black Joy that isn't accessible. Because I write about the rural. People don't think about the rural as a place of joy because we always think poverty. And I'll leave it at that. I think we have time for one more question, yes? No? Oh, no, we have no time. But guys, thank you for coming. It's so lovely to have seen you. Thank you.